Taught high school science for 15 years, and now it's been my privilege for 12 years to travel around and speak on creation, evolution, and dinosaurs. We're going to continue in this session with what we started in the last session about lies in the textbooks and what you can do about it. I collect public school textbooks. I have hundreds of them, and I read them, believe it or not, and I study them and find out there are things taught in these books that just simply are not true. And we covered quite a few of those last night. We're going to finish up a few more here in this session and then tell you some practical steps of things you can do to fix the problem in your local school. You know, if you see something that is designed, it obviously demands a designer. As far as I know, this is the world's largest rock group. Well, do you know of a bigger one? I like to ask evolutionists the question. Now, fellas, Mount Rushmore has 4 faces on it. Faces of 4 different presidents. Do you believe there's any way these faces could have appeared on this rock by chance? Do you think the wind could have done that, or erosion, or thermal expansion of the rock, or maybe exfoliation? You know, what caused these faces to appear on the rock? And they would say, well, obviously it was designed. A guy named Borglum designed it, took him a long time to build it, and there it is today. I agree. It is just obviously designed. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure it out. If you're driving through South Dakota, through the Black Hills, and you see 4 faces on the rock, you don't automatically assume a natural occurrence. You assume a human designer was involved. Now, if you find a complex object, you should conclude there is a designer. But the textbooks don't use that word design very often, if at all. They almost always use the word adapted. Like this one says, the pitcher plant has adaptations to help it get nitrogen. Now, wait a minute. Why don't they say it was designed? This one says gills are an adaptation to living in water. Well, the reason they don't say it's a design feature is because then some kid might say, well, who's the designer? Because design demands a designer. That's just obvious to anybody with half a brain. I have a Casio Databank stopwatch. It holds 300 phone numbers. It is a calculator. It's a stopwatch, an alarm clock, a countdown timer. It does not tell time. I have to look at it. But this really is an amazing machine, okay? $70 at Walmart. The watch is made in Japan. I was in Japan a couple months ago. I did not get to meet the guy who makes the Casio watches. But I would be willing to bet there is somebody over there who designs them. Is it logical for me to stand here in America and say, you know what? I've never seen the designer of this watch, therefore I deny he exists. That's not logical, is it? It is perfectly logical for me to say, even though I've never seen the designer, it is so complicated there must have been a designer. That's perfectly logical to say that. See, when you look at something complicated like a watch, you should conclude 2 things. There is a designer, and he's pretty smart. When you look at something like the world through the telescope or the microscope, and you look at any living cell in the body, you should decide, you know, there is a designer, and he's pretty smart. And God knows the study of science will bring people to a knowledge of the Creator. That's why Satan has worked so hard in the last few hundred years to make sure the study of science turns kids away from the Creator. There's no conflict between science and the Bible. There's a conflict between science and evolution, and there's a conflict between the Bible and evolution, because evolution is not part of science. It's interesting, evolutionists argue against design using arguments that they designed. You ought to think about that one for a while. There's a great book showing how complex things can be. It's called Darwin's Black Box by Michael Behe. He spends an entire chapter in this book describing the hair on a bacteria. Bacteria are pretty tiny. They have a little hair on the back that whips around and makes them swim through their little world, okay? That little hair on the bacteria is like a complex rotary engine. That hair is so tiny that the motor is so tiny that 8 million of them would fit in the cross-section of an average human hair. And yet that motor turns 100,000 RPM forward or backward. I've had 111 cars, I believe, since I started, at 70-some motorcycles. Never had a new one, never had a new car. Always get a clunker and have to fix it up. My daddy taught us boys how to work on cars. I can do just about anything to a car. But I can't imagine building a motor so tiny that 8 million of them would fit in the cross-section of a human hair. Especially building a motor that'll turn 100,000 RPM. Can you imagine what that would require? Talk about precision. And yet some people want us to believe this evolved by chance. Look, it had to be designed. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure it out. There must have been a designer. And you know, the bacteria swims through his little world using that little hair as a propeller. He swims the equivalent of a human swimming 60 miles an hour. Now, the other problem is, as you get smaller, the viscosity becomes greater. So the fluid he's going through, to him, feels like you swimming through peanut butter. Can you imagine swimming through peanut butter at 60 miles an hour? And yet the textbook says humans evolved from bacteria. Man, if they can swim 60 miles an hour, we need to sign them up for the Olympics. If we evolved from bacteria, we're getting worse, not better. So lie number 16 of the lies we've been covering in the textbooks, there's no evidence that bacteria turn to humans. There's no evidence that any animal has ever produced a different kind of animal. Bacteria always produce bacteria. Now, Charles Darwin said something interesting in his book. In this book, right here, Charlie Darwin said, on page 217, he said, to suppose that the eye, the human eyeball, could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd. Did you know eyeballs are real complicated? But then Charlie goes on for the next 2 pages and says, but it must have done it because, after all, they're here. It must have evolved because we have them. I mean, that's his kind of logic, okay? Now, this textbook says, the complex structure of the human eye may be the product of millions of years of evolution. Why doesn't God get the glory for what he made? You know, eyeballs are pretty complicated. This textbook says, boys and girls, right here, you can better understand how the eye might have evolved if you can picture a series of changes. Notice what they just did to the kids here. Here we are in a science textbook telling the students you have to imagine how something happened. That takes it outside the field of science. See, evolution is based on imagination. Science is not. Science is things that we can observe and test and demonstrate. Imagining how the eye might have evolved is not science. That's somebody's religion. Did you know the Bible says God formed the eye? And eyeballs are incredibly complicated. At the back of your eyeball, you have 1 square inch called the retina, yet it has 137 million light-sensitive cells. How would you like to be the electrician to wire that up? 137 million connections in 1 square inch. Anybody want to tackle that job? My Heavenly Father did it. He's pretty smart, ain't he? I was sitting in the office one day and the phone rang. Boy, you never know what you're going to get when the phone rings at my place. I said, hello, Creation Science. This is Brother Hovind. The voice on the other end said, how can you be so stupid as to believe in creation? I said, excuse me? He said, how can you be so dumb as to believe in creation? I said, what's my other choice? He said, evolution. I said, why would I believe in that? He said, well, because everything in the world is poorly designed. I said, like what? He said, like the human eyeball, it's a poor design. I said, what are you talking about? He said, don't you know the blood vessels are in front of the retina, which means the light comes into the eye through the blood vessels to hit the retina, and the blood vessels block some of the light. He said, that's a poor design. He said, you know, a freshman engineer in college could figure that out. He said, the octopus has a much better eye because their blood vessels are behind the retina. So their eye is designed much better than the human eye. I said, sir, I don't know who you are or where you're calling from, but let me explain something to you. We live in the air. Air is a very poor insulator for UV light. UV light destroys your eyeball. You need the blood vessels in front of your retina because that's the body's last defense against ultraviolet light. Now, octopus live in the water. Water stops UV light. So they can have the blood vessels behind, which gives them better vision in the deep ocean than you would have. However, you don't live in the deep ocean. You live in the air. And air doesn't block UV light very well. I said, now, if you want to swap eyes with an octopus, you just have at it. But you will be blind in a couple of days. We are perfectly designed for living in the air. Do you have any other dumb questions? He said, no, that was it. Click. What they're trying to say is, I don't think this is designed properly, therefore it must have evolved. Well, first place, maybe you don't know why it's designed that way. Maybe there really is a reason. And secondly, that's a lousy argument for evolution. Even if there are bad designs, that's not an argument for evolution. Not at all. When you consider the fact that you are a copy off 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 a copy of Adam, The fact that we can even see and move at all is pretty amazing, right? So what about the origin of life? How did life get started? This textbook tells the students, in the 1950s, Urey and Miller wanted to know how the universe and how the solar system and Earth had come to be. They took a mixture of Earth's primitive atmosphere. Ooh, now we got a problem here. We'll show you in a minute. It says, although he never proved how life originated, he did add evidence to the theory that life could have started by itself on the primitive Earth. Well, it's very unfortunate that students are taught this kind of stuff. Let's just learn the truth about what really happened. Here's a textbook that says, swirling in the waters of the oceans is a bubbling broth of complex chemicals. Progress from a complex chemical soup to a living organism is very slow. Well, I guess it is. It doesn't even happen. It's totally stopped. That's how slow it is. This fellow confesses in the encyclopedia, he says, you know, the origin of species was not addressed in 1859, even though that's the title of the book. And it's still a mystery in 1998. Both the origin of life and the origin of major groups of animals remains unknown. Nobody knows how life could get started. But their students are always shown this picture. This is one of the icons to make them believe in evolution. This is a great book that we have here. You can get it through our ministry, The Icons of Evolution. Different things that are used in just about every textbook to try to make the kids believe in this theory. Fascinating book. It's 15 of the major icons and says, look, folks, here's the truth about it. And the picture of Miller and Urey standing by those glass tubes with the gas going through is always one of the icons that's used to support evolution. Students are taught that life evolved from non-living materials. This textbook says, many important events occurred during the Archean era, the most important of which was the evolution of life. Progress from complex molecules to even the simplest living organism was a very long process. I guess it was. It didn't even happen. This one says, the first living cells emerged between 4 billion and 3.8 billion years ago. There is no record of the event. But you expect the kids to believe in it and be tested on it, right? That's not part of science. This one says, the first self-replicating systems must have emerged in this organic soup. That is lie number 18, folks. There is no evidence that we came from soup and that life came from non-living material. There is no evidence for this at all. Let me tell you what really happened. Miller took some gases. He took methane, ammonia, water vapor, and hydrogen, and he circulated them through some glass tubes, and one of the chambers in the system had a spark. That was supposed to simulate lightning strikes in the primitive ocean. When it got to the bottom, there was a trap to drain off anything that formed. In case it made something, they would drain it off because they didn't want it to go through again because the spark would destroy whatever was created. Now, putting a trap in the system to drain off the red goo at the bottom is not realistic to what might have happened in the ocean at all, okay? But what they had, this textbook says, about the time Miller discovered that a red goo at the bottom of his flask was rich in amino acids. Now, wait a minute, rich in amino acids? That's lie number 19. It was not rich in amino acids. No one has made life. They didn't even come close. What they made was poisonous to life. Here's what happened. They took these gases and circulated them through the tubes. Now, he excluded oxygen on purpose because he knew oxygen would destroy anything that was formed. So what he had was called a reducing atmosphere, no oxygen. He knew that life could not evolve with oxygen present. So they simply excluded oxygen. The problem with that is ozone is made from oxygen, and ozone blocks UV light. So if you don't have oxygen, you can't have ozone, which means the UV light is going to destroy the ammonia, and that was one of your gases. So you can't get life to evolve with oxygen, and you can't get life to evolve without oxygen. Looks to me like you can't get life to evolve, period. By the way, the Earth has always had oxygen. Even though the geologic column doesn't exist, if you go by their thinking, the lowest layers actually had more oxygen than we have today. Probably 30% oxygen. So the whole Miller experiment is baloney. Second problem, he filtered out the product with that trap at the bottom. That's not realistic for what would happen in nature. What he really made was 85% tar, 13% carboxylic acid. Both of those are toxic to life. 2% of his mixture was amino acids. I would say that is not rich in amino acids. The other problem is, mostly what he made was 2 of the 20 amino acids. It's like making letters of the alphabet and you make a whole bunch of Z's and X's. Well, you can't spell too many things with that. He made a bunch of 2 amino acids. To complicate the problem, the acids will bond, the acid and the tar will bond with the amino acids very quickly. They're not going to bond with each other. See, amino acids are sort of like letters of the alphabet. And what he made was a few letters of the alphabet. It takes a bunch of letters in the right sequence to make words and to make paragraphs and to make books. To make a few letters of the alphabet by random chance and then to claim that you made a book by random chance is two very different steps, okay? He made the equivalent of a few letters of the alphabet, and he needed to make a huge dictionary. And half of his amino acids were backwards. See, amino acids have a spin to them, like right-handed and left-handed bolts or nuts. You mechanics have probably had the experience of picking up a left-handed nut trying to put it on a right-handed bolt. It's just not going to work. And half the amino acids were backwards. Well, this really complicates the problem, especially since the smallest proteins we know of have 70 to 100 amino acids, all in the precise order and all left-handed. And the DNA and RNA have all right-handed amino acids. No, he did not make life in the laboratory. There are hundreds of amino acids, and they must combine in the right order to make the proteins. Actually, they unbond in water faster than they bond. And the last anybody checked, the oceans are completely full of water. Brownian motion is going to drive them apart. No, the experiments to make life in the laboratory have been a failure. One student in a University of West Florida here, he stood up in the crowd while I was speaking on creation. We were having question-answer time. And he said, Dr. Hovind, if scientists ever make life in the laboratory, what are you going to say then? Huh? I said, well, in the first place, they are nowhere close to making life in the laboratory. Nowhere close. Secondly, if a bunch of scientists make life in the laboratory, I guess that will prove that it takes intelligence to create life. So you're going to be proving creation, not evolution. Right? Think about it. They somehow get this idea that, all we need to do is get the chemicals together and add energy, and poof, life will form. Well, if you think that's the way it works, then let's do an experiment. We're going to put a frog in a blender and turn it on. In a matter of a few moments, you will have frog nog. Now, I want you to add energy to the frog nog, okay? I want you to nuke it, microwave it, blend it for a zillion years, put the jumper cables to it. I mean, you do whatever you want. Add all the energy you like to your frog nog. How long will it take to reassemble the frog? Don't you have all the molecules to make a frog in one place? Sure you do. But you can't put it back together and make a frog, can you? No, folks, adding energy doesn't help. So what about these trees of life the textbooks talk about? They typically will show the students how that bacteria slowly evolved to humans over billions of years, and they arrange it in a tree. Now, these trees of life are nonsense, and even Mary Leakey knows that, okay, and she believes in evolution. She says these trees are nothing but nonsense. Stephen Gould, the communist professor at Harvard University, says the evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips and nodes of their branches. The rest is inference. That means they infer, they hope, they guess, they think it might have happened. However reasonable, not the evidence of fossils. They just make up these trees, folks. Look at this textbook says, all the many forms of life on Earth today are descended from a common ancestor, found in a population of primitive unicellular organisms. Now, hold it. There's no such thing as a primitive unicellular organism. But they show the kids that we evolved from something other than we are today, and nobody's ever seen any animal produce a different kind of animal. This one says the humans, the birds, and the crocodiles had a common ancestor. Isn't that what that tree is supposed to represent to the kids? Don't you think a kid going through science class is going to come out looking at that saying, wow, it's true, it's in a book, it must be true. That is pure nonsense, folks. These trees are based on imagination, not on science. Nobody's got any evidence that any animal has ever produced a different kind of animal. And anybody that teaches that kind of stuff to their kids in school better read what Jesus said. Whoso shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck and he were drowned in the depth of the sea. Any of you that are teaching evolution to a bunch of kids and destroying their faith in the Scripture, you are in trouble when you face God. Mark my words, okay? Judgment is coming. Then they somehow get this idea that if something is smaller, it is simpler. They talk about a simple life form. Look, a small creature like a paramecium is not simple. You can put thousands of these into a drop of water, and yet each one is more complicated than a space shuttle. And the space shuttle is the most complex machine ever built by man. Smaller is not simpler, it is more complex. So lie number 21, they tell the kids that if it's smaller, it is simpler. That's simply not true. Here's a microchip inside a paper clip. That's not simple, that's complicated. Matter of fact, here's an ant holding a microchip This microchip in the ant's mouth is capable of processing every letter of the Bible 200 times in 1 second. Smaller is more complicated. I'll show you. Let's compare the Cray computer, which at one time was the world's largest, fastest computer, the YMPC-90. We're going to compare it to a brain of a honeybee. We would all agree that the Cray computer is huge. The brain of a honeybee is tiny. Have I lost anybody so far? Okay. Did you know the Cray computer processed 6 billion calculations per second? Estimates are that the honeybee's brain, which is not only keeping track of where he's going, it's also keeping track of flight. Anybody that flies an airplane, brother, you know how it is. There's a lot of things to keep track of when you're flying an airplane, right? He has to fly, plus run his digestive system, plus keep his heart beating to keep the juices circulating, plus he's got to keep track of where he's going. He's got a lot of things going on in that brain. Estimates are that his brain is processing about 1 trillion calculations per second. That's 1,000 billion. So the honeybee's brain is probably 166 times faster than a Cray computer. Now, the Cray computer uses many megawatts. The honeybee only uses 10 microwatts. What that means is the honeybee is very efficient. Matter of fact, he is so efficient, he can fly 1,000,000 miles on 1 gallon of honey. Let me see you invent a machine that gets 1,000,000 miles per gallon. My Heavenly Father did. He's pretty smart, ain't he? Let's see, the Cray used to cost $48 million. Honeybee's brain is pretty cheap. You splat them on your windshield all the time. Many people scramble when the Cray breaks down. Nobody heals the honeybee. A self-healing computer. How would you like one of those? The Cray weighed 2,300 pounds. Honeybee's brain doesn't weigh very much. Let's see, what conclusions can we draw here? The supercomputer is huge, it is slow, it is inefficient, it costs lots of money, it must be maintained, it had to be designed. There isn't anybody with half a brain who would tell you that the Cray came from an explosion in an electronics factory. Right? And yet they turn right around and say the human brain evolved. Look, your brain's a lot more complex than a honeybee. It's been said a person can walk into a room and look around the room, and in 1 second, your brain processes enough information to keep the Cray computer busy for 100 years analyzing it. Your brain does that in 1 second. We are amazingly built. By the way, the human brain has not only more memory capacity, it has computational power, bits per second. We're at the top, folks. We have more memory capacity and computational power than the entire national phone system. They say, well, how many have ever done electrical work, hooking up electrical appliances or, wiring houses, okay? My dad was electrical engineer at Caterpillar Tractor Company. He taught us boys all about electricity when we were a little bitty. So we've built a bunch of houses, always did our own wiring, stuff like that. It's been said there are more connections in one human brain than all of the connections that have ever been made in the history of humanity. How many wires have been connected together? Soldered, crimped, twist-locked? You got more connections in your brain than all the connections in the world. That's a lot. Incredibly complicated the human brain is. Now, if you want to believe it happened by chance, that's perfectly fine, but that's not logical. One professor, I asked him the question, I said, sir, do you think your brain is just 3 pounds of chemicals that got together by chance over billions of years? He said, yes, I do. I said, well, then how can you trust your thoughts and the reasoning processes and the conclusions you come to? Maybe you've got a chemical in there backwards. He did, by the way, several, I believe. But then they're going to tell the kids that DNA proves evolution. Now, just hold on a minute. DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid. This textbook says we have evidence from molecular biology. Ooh, big word. That sounds impressive. Do they really have evidence of evolution from molecular biology? This college textbook says, Darwin speculated that all forms of life are related. This speculation has been verified. Now that is simply a lie, folks. They have not verified that all life forms have a common ancestor. And DNA is incredibly complicated. Did you know the DNA, the chromosomes in your body, is the most complicated molecule in the universe? No molecule is more complex than a DNA. And the average person in this room has 50 trillion cells in their body. Each of those cells contains 46 chromosomes, except for the gametes, they've got 23. And if you took all the chromosomes out of your body, it would fill 2 tablespoons. And yet if you tied them end to end and stretched those incredibly complicated chromosomes out, if they were all stretched out, tied end to end, one person's chromosomes would reach from Earth to the moon and back 5 million round trips to the moon out of 2 tablespoons. Pretty complicated. The code in the chromosomes is more complex and holds more information than all the computer programs ever written by man combined. And it fits into 2 tablespoons. Bill Gates said the DNA is like a software program, but it's much more complex than anything we've been able to design. You know, the DNA is unbelievably complicated. If you typed out the code found in your DNA, when you got done typing, you'd have enough books to fill Grand Canyon 40 times. Anybody work with computers at all? I want to see you get 40 Grand Canyons full of books, condense it to software, CD-ROM, PK-ZIP, SciQuest, I don't care what you use. When you get done, it must fit into 2 tablespoons. Anybody want to tackle that project? My Heavenly Father did it, just like that. He spoke it into existence. Boy, he's pretty smart. King David said, I will praise thee, for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And he didn't even have a microscope, and he could figure it out. You know, from conception to birth, the baby adds 15,000 cells per minute to its body. Each of those cells more complex than a space shuttle. How would you like to be responsible for supplying the assembly line that was putting together 15,000 space shuttles a minute for 9 months? How'd you like to make sure they have enough nuts and bolts and screws and, parts? Some of you women are saying, I did it once, man, it's hard. One lady said, I did it 8 times. It didn't get any easier any time. Folks, it's incredibly complicated, especially when you consider the chances of one DNA happening by chance have been calculated to be 1 times 10 to the 119,000th power. That's a pretty big number when you consider the visible universe is 10 to the 28 inches in diameter. It's just not going to happen. Now, if evolution is true, then I thought, hey, the more chromosomes you have, the more complex you must be, so you must have evolved farther. So I made a chart of different plants and animals based upon their chromosome number. I discovered penicillin has only 2 chromosomes. So it must have evolved. First, that must be the simplest life form. And then slowly, over millions of years, it evolved some more chromosomes and turned into a fruit fly. They have 8 chromosomes. And slowly we got tomatoes. They have 12. By the way, so do houseflies. Identical twins, Pretty hard to tell the difference between a tomato and a housefly. And then very slowly they evolved some more chromosomes and became a pea. And then very slowly it got 2 more chromosomes and turned into a bee. Now here you can see the similarity. P, B, very similar. And then slowly, over millions of years, it evolved until we had triplets. Did you know the possum, the redwood tree, and the kidney bean all have 22 chromosomes? The average scientist cannot tell them apart. Let's see, which one is which here? Let me think here. Tree, possum, kidney bean. I think I got them right. And then today, we have evolved far enough that we now have 46. And if we can just get 2 more, we're going to be a tobacco plant. I know some that already smell like it. Sometimes I'll get on the elevator and I'll say, man, you're evolving, you're way ahead of me. How did you do that? And someday, I'm sure it won't happen in my lifetime, but we might someday get enough chromosomes to be a carp. By the way, dog and chicken are twins, And someday in the far distant future, we might have enough chromosomes to be a fern. I was at a church one time. A lady walked up to me after church, said, Mr. Hovind, I'm fern. I shook hands with that hand right there. I'll never wash it again. They tell the kids, though, that the percentage of DNA similarity proves we're related. Here's what the textbook says. Boys and girls, humans and orangutans are 96% similar. That proves a common ancestor 15 million years ago. Now, just hold on a minute. Similar DNA codes prove the same engineers wrote the codes. Did you know Microsoft PowerPoint and Microsoft Word and all the Microsoft programs have lots of similarities? I mean, when you hit spell check in PowerPoint, it's the exact same program as when you hit spell check in Microsoft Word. And if you compared all the lines of code, I think you'd find there are millions of similarities. Does that prove both of those programs evolved from Morse code by themselves? Or does that prove the same engineers are writing the codes? Similar DNA proves the same engineer wrote the codes, folks. But they tell the students to think critically. Here we go again with this critical thinking. Now watch this here. Number 26. As you learned in chapter 2, all living things make proteins from the same 20 kinds of amino acids. That's true. Explain how this fact, that's a good fact, supports the idea that all life forms shared a common ancestor. No. That's like saying, you know, all books written in English have the same 26 letters. There's only 26 letters in the alphabet, folks. And you can compare all the books in the libraries and find those same 26 letters in all of them. Wow. Does that prove they evolved from each other? No. That's the code to write in English, okay? And 20 amino acids is the code to write living things. And God did it that way, I suspect, because He wants to make sure that the brown cow can eat the green grass and digest it into white milk. And I can drink the white milk and get the blonde hair. See, we're all made from the same 20 amino acids, otherwise we couldn't digest anything else. That really was thinking ahead on the Creator's part, you know. See, if everyone had a different code, we could only eat other humans. That wouldn't last long. See, that's lie number 23, folks. This shows a common creator, not a common ancestor. Similar structures nearly always have similar plans. Similar bridges have similar blueprints. This hardly constitutes evidence that one sired the other or that they were erected by tornadoes, just because they have a similar blueprint. You know, the lug nuts from a Chevy will fit on a Pontiac. Similar design. Does that prove they both evolved from a Honda 18 million years ago? No. Same guys designed them. That's what it proved. Now, man has a pretty good understanding of cars. I've had lots of cars. I don't get time to work on them anymore, but I know how. If you understand how a car works, does that prove nobody designed it? I mean, even if you studied the car completely till you thoroughly understood every nut and bolt, that still doesn't prove nobody designed it, does it? Understanding the operation of a car or a machine does not at all explain the origin of the machine. And even if we study the human body and thoroughly understand it, and nobody does, by the way, but if we did, that still wouldn't take away the designer. There still has to be a designer. When my son, who's running that camera right there, turned 16, he got his driver's license. Suppose your kid turns 16. He gets his license. He says, "Hey, Dad, I got my license." "Wow, son, you're 16. You made it. We didn't think you would, but you did." He says, "Hey, Dad, can I borrow the car?" "Well, son, listen, your mom and I knew this day was coming. The car's pretty complicated, son. Did you know there are 3,000 bolts required to hold a car together, and one nut can scatter it all over the highway?" "Son, we don't think you're ready for the whole car. You know, you don't understand the whole thing. So this year we decided we're going to let you use 10% of the car. Next year, maybe another 10%. What good is 10% of a car? That's what you put in a junkyard, isn't it? Now, what good is 10% of an eyeball or a feather or a wing or a beak or any complex structure? Hey, how many things have to be right on your car to make it work? Thousands of things, right? How many things have to be wrong to make it stop working? Any one of many thousands of things, right? One wire in the wrong place, right? Doesn't take much to make it quit working, does it? And anything in the human body is a lot more complicated than a car. So these DNA sequences are not evidence for evolution. They are evidence for design. Even experts will tell you we have no direct access to the process of evolution using DNA. It's only by creative imagination, especially when you consider that probably less than 1% of human DNA has been thoroughly analyzed. Even if 99% of that 1% was similar to chimps, that still wouldn't prove any relationship. It would prove a common designer. Chimps and humans have millions of differences, by the way. We could spend a long time on that. However, if you think percentage of similarity proves something, let me show you the research I've been doing. I'm a research scientist, you know. I've been doing research on the similarity of various objects based upon their water content. I discovered in my research that clouds are 100% water. Watermelons are 97% water. Only 3% difference. That proves they had a common ancestor 19.6 million years ago. Not only that, I discovered jellyfish are 98% water. Ooh, the missing link. And so are snow cones. They're 98% water too. They're identical twins. Take a bite out of them. You can't tell the difference. Somehow they get around to telling our kids that fossils have evidence for evolution. Like this one says, we have evidence from fossils for evolution. Now just hold on a minute. No, we don't. That is lie number 24. There is no fossil evidence for evolution. None. Darwin said in his book, if my theory be true, numberless intermediate varieties must assuredly have existed. Oh, you're right about that, Charlie. You know, to change from a rock to a human takes an awful lot of intermediate varieties. But look what the experts say. David Ropp is a strong believer in evolution. He said in the years after Darwin, his advocates hoped to find predictable progressions. In general, these have not been found, yet the optimism has died hard and some pure fantasy has crept into textbooks. You're kidding. Fantasy in the textbooks? Oh, yes, ma'am. I mean, pure fantasy. See, if you find a fossil in the dirt, you don't know that it had any kids. All you know is it died. You're not even sure where it died. You just know where it ended up, right? You find a fossil in the dirt, you don't know that it had any kids, and you sure don't know that it had different kids. And why would they think fossils in the dirt can do something animals today cannot do? Animals today cannot produce anything other than their kind. Why do we think the fossils could do it? How come it can happen long ago and far away, and it can't happen today? Luther Sunderland wrote letters or went and visited all the major museums or wrote letters to the directors, and he said, where's the evidence for evolution? He wrote a letter to Colin Patterson, who's got the largest fossil collection in the world at the British Museum of Natural History. He said, Mr. Patterson, I read your book about evolution, but I noticed you didn't show us any missing links. Why not? Patterson wrote back and said, I fully agree with your comments on the lack of evolutionary transitions in my book. If I knew of any, fossil or living, I would certainly have included them. I will lay it on the line. There is not one such fossil. There aren't any missing links, folks. The whole chain is missing. It's not just a link they're looking for. And even guys like Stephen Gould will say, the absence of fossil evidence has been a nagging problem for evolution, but he believes in it anyway. It doesn't diminish his faith any. He just says we haven't found the evidence. So he and other fellows have come up with a theory called punctuated equilibrium. This is just really a resurrected Goldschmidt theory, who said the first bird hatched from a reptilian egg. What? Here's what they say with this theory. The theory says, you know, we don't find any evidence for gradual change, therefore evolution must have happened quickly. See, in their mind, there's only two choices. Evolution happens slowly, like Darwin said, or evolution happened quickly, in leaps or jumps or saltations, they call it. Oh, now wait a minute. There's another choice. Maybe it didn't happen at all. Oh, they don't want to consider that possibility. So they think either it happened slowly or it happened quickly. And since we don't find evidence for it happening slowly, therefore it must have happened quickly. That's not science. You see, evolution is a shell game. You ever seen that game where they put the pea under the shells and they try to get you confused? That's what evolution is. The geologist thinks that the biologist has the evidence. The biologist says, oh no, we don't have it, the anthropologist has it. And it's a shell game, but there's no pea under any of them, folks. Nobody has the evidence. I can show you. If there's some real evidence for macroevolution or evolutionary changes above the microevolutionary level, we've been offering for nearly 10 years now a reward. We will pay $250,000 for evidence for evolution. Check my website, drdino.com, D-R-D-I-N-O, and you can see. Several folks have sent in stuff. They say, we've got proof for evolution. One guy said, I can prove it. I said, okay, what do you have? He said, I'm working in the laboratory, and we've produced soybean plants that are resistant to frost. I said, man, that is good, and that will be handy. What did you start with? He said, a soybean plant. I said, what do you have now? He said, a soybean plant. I said, sorry, that's not evolution. That's the same kind of plant. I mean, stand back and look at this, folks, okay? There is no evidence. They're going to tell the kids in the textbooks, we've got evidence from the horse evolving. They will show the kids a four-toed horse slowly evolving to a one-toed horse. Now that is simply a lie, folks, okay? The horse evolution has been proven wrong many years ago. What they do not tell the kids in the textbooks is that the original so-called horse is still alive today. It's a meat-eating animal about the size of a fox, and it's got sharp teeth. It is not related to a horse at all. It had 18 pairs of ribs. The next one has 15. The next one has 19, and then you go back to 18 pairs of ribs. Something is very different here. But they put this in the textbooks as if it is proven to be a fact, and it's not. By the way, there's quite a variety of horse sizes today, don't you know? And the experts will tell you the other examples, like the much repeated gradual evolution of the modern horse, have not held up under close examination. What that means is, it's not true. George Simpson, G.G. Simpson said, many examples commonly cited, such as the evolution of the horse family or the saber-toothed tigers, can be readily shown to have been unintentionally falsified and not to be really orthogenetic. He said this back in 1950. 50 years ago, it was proven the horse evolution is not true, but it's still in textbooks today used in your town. I know it takes a while to get textbooks up to date, but 50 years is plenty of time. Cut that page out of the book. We'll give you some ideas later, practical ways to fix this, but the horse evolution was made up by Othniel Marsh back in 1874. He picked animals from all over the world. He didn't find them in that order anyplace. Modern horses are found with and lower than the so-called ancient horses. So it's a moot point. They were already there. The ancient horse is still alive today, folks. It's just like the hyrax alive in Turkey and East Africa right now. The number of ribs, the number of toes, the looks at the toes and the teeth are very different. In South America, the fossils are in reverse order. You find the one-toed horse on the bottom and the three-toed horse on top. Well, why did it evolve backwards? They're never found in the order presented, and the three-toed and one-toed horses grazed side by side. One is not the ancestor to the other. They're just different kinds of animals, that's all. The Tulsa Zoo finally took their horse evolution display down because so many folks complained that this is a lie. And why does the zoo feel like they've got to teach evolution anyway? Does the Gulf Breeze Zoo have displays about evolution? Why? Why don't they just show the kids the animals? Especially if this is taxpayer funded. I think those who believe in evolution ought to pay to spread their religion at their own expense, not at everybody else's expense. Harvard University still has the horse evolution on display, proven wrong 50 years ago. I stood there at Peabody Museum and watched as hundreds of kids came through and saw this display and were never told one word that it was wrong. I've been there many times to the Peabody Museum, and it just breaks my heart. Why doesn't somebody stand outside that museum and hand out a copy of a videotape or a book or something to every kid that comes through and say, kid, you just got lied to. There is no evidence for evolution. See, arranging something in order doesn't prove it happened. And they're not even found in that order. So arranging things artificially does not prove a relationship. See, if I get buried on top of a hamster, does that prove he's my grandpa? Well, he's lower than me. It doesn't prove a thing, does it? I've been piecing together evidence for evolution for many years. I've taken fragmentary evidence, and I've been able to actually reconstruct the evolution of the fork. After long hours of research on this topic, I found many mutants that, of course, did not survive the process as they slowly evolved, but I believe sincerely that the knife evolved first, and then it slowly turned into a spoon. Great geological pressures squeezed it, dished it out, concave one side, convex on the other, and turned it into a spoon. Then slowly erosion cut grooves into the end, made it a short-tined fork. And over millions of years, the grooves got longer and wider, and it became a long-tined fork. I knew I had the right order, but I felt like I had a missing link, particularly between spoons and forks. See, spoons are rounded and have no grooves. Forks are squared and grooves. Two jumps in one. Even punctuated equilibrium can't do that. So I knew there must be a missing link in here, but I couldn't find it. Till one day I was flying to Connecticut. I was 30,000 feet off the ground. The stewardess came down the aisle and handed me the missing link. I don't think she knew what she had. But my trained scientific eye picked it up right away. I said, wow, this is it. Man. I stuck it in my pocket. Later that day, we went to get some chicken at the restaurant, and I found another one. There they are, folks, the missing links. So the evolution of silverware is nearly complete, which means I probably need a government grant to finish the research on this. Another $30 or $40 million ought to do it. I'd probably get it, wouldn't I, if I applied for it. Many frauds, this is an obvious fork head on a spoon handle. But see, when you're trained in this theory, in this field, you can catch the frauds right away. You know, somebody tried to slip that one in on me. I said, no, I'm not buying this at all. Look, you can arrange words in order and turn a cat to a dot to a cot to a dot to a dog, changing one letter at a time. You play around for a while, you turn yourself into a fool. That's what's going to happen. Now they're telling the kids dinosaurs turned to birds. Look at this news article. Dinosaurs are alive as birds, scientist says. Oh, wow, that makes it official, doesn't it? That's absurd, and that is a lie. Dinosaurs did not turn to birds. 1999, October 15th, they ran an article that said, we found the missing link. Boy, it was in the news all over the world. Breaking news, National Geographic, October 99, missing link discovered. Oops, January 2000. Sorry, folks, you made a mistake. It was not a missing link. It was a mistake. It was a fraud, actually. We got plenty of material on that, but this one says dinosaurs, or birds, are the descendants of dinosaurs. Well, now, kids, in case you don't know, there are a few differences between a dinosaur and a bird. You don't just put a few feathers on him and say, come on, man, give it a try. It won't hurt too bad. It's just not going to work like that, okay? See, reptiles have 4 perfectly good legs. Birds have 2 legs and 2 wings, which means if his front legs are going to turn to wings, somewhere along the line, they're going to be half leg, half wing, aren't they? Which means now he can't run and he can't fly. He's got a real problem. Who's going to feed him while he transitions? This is pure baloney, but the textbooks still keep teaching it. Yes, boys and girls, Archaeopteryx is proof that dinosaurs turned to birds. Well, just hold on a minute. Archaeopteryx is a bird, folks. It's a perching bird, and no amount of paleobabble is going to change that. And Alan Fiducia is one of the world's authority on birds at UNC Chapel Hill. He says it's just a bird. See, Archaeopteryx means ancient wing, and they're going to say Archaeopteryx had claws on his wings. Boy, you're right, he sure does. And they'll say, see, that proves he used to be a dinosaur. No, quite a few birds today still have claws on their wings, okay? The swans do, ibis does, about 12 different birds have claws on their wings. The Hoatzin does. That doesn't prove it used to be a dinosaur. They're going to say, well, he's got teeth in his beak. No, that's unusual, all right. Most birds don't have teeth. Some do. You know, some reptiles have teeth, some don't. Some fish have teeth, some don't. Some mammals have teeth, some don't. Some of you have teeth, some don't, okay? It doesn't prove it used to be a dinosaur. And by the way, going from teeth to no teeth is losing, not gaining. That would be backwards evolution, wouldn't it? Then they're going to say, bird feathers evolved from the same scales that protected dinosaurs so well. Now just hold on a minute. Feathers turn to scales? Or scales turn to feathers? I'm sorry. Feathers are incredibly complicated. Now, it is true that feathers and scales are both made of the same protein. It's called keratin. That doesn't prove they're related. Battleships and tin cans are both made out of the same metal, too. It's called iron. That doesn't prove one evolved from the other, does it? Somebody's using the same material to design different objects. And God used keratin to design lots of different things. Hair, fingernails, scales, feathers. It's just proof there's a designer using the same material. That's what it's proof of. And by the way, feathers are considered homologous with reptilian scales. However, they are unique. They're not similar to a scale at all. And birds and reptiles have very different lung systems. Their lungs are totally different. And birds, just like today, were already alive before Archaeopteryx ever got here. Here's a bird, 130 million years old. Now, I don't buy their time frame at all, but if you find a bird in a rock 130 million years old by your thinking, then you can't have a bird coming along later. That's a transition. Here's a bird supposed to be 140 million years old, much older than Archaeopteryx from Science News. Fossil remains of a bird 142 million years old. And it's a fully formed bird. There are plenty of other reasons to refute the dinosaur-bird connection, says Fiducia. How do you derive birds from a heavy earthbound bipedal reptile that has a deep body, a heavy balancing tail, and 4 shortened limbs? He said, biophysically, it's impossible. But they believe it happened anyway. The problems are multitude. We'll just go through them quickly here. The lungs are totally different. Modern birds are already alive when Archaeopteryx was here, even by their twisted geological thinking. Scales and feathers attach to the body differently, and they develop from different genes on the chromosomes. Birds have a 4-chambered heart. Most reptiles have a 3-chambered heart. Birds lay a leathery egg. Reptiles lay a leathery egg. Birds lay a hard-shelled egg. The tail is different. The hips are different. The reproductive system is different. I'm sorry, there is no fossil evidence of how reptiles change to birds. So kids, don't let them tell you there is. There just simply is no fossil evidence at all. So who is right anyway? This fellow says, Richard Dawkins, who hates creationists, he says, it is absolutely safe to say if you meet someone who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, or insane, or wicked. Boy, he's real open-minded, isn't he? In other words, if you don't believe like me, you're stupid. Sir Arthur Keith, who wrote the foreword when Darwin's book was republished, he wrote the 100-year anniversary foreword to the book. Arthur Keith said, evolution is unproved and unprovable. We believe it because the only alternative is special creation, and that is unthinkable. Evolution is a fairy tale for grown-ups. The theory has helped nothing in the progress of science. It is useless. Boy, now that's quite a quote. Evolution is not only useless, folks, it's dangerous. Malcolm Muggeridge said, I myself am convinced that the theory of evolution, especially the extent to which it has been applied, will be one of the great jokes in the history books of the future. People are going to laugh at you for believing in that theory 20 years from now, or however long it takes, because it is a silly theory. Scientists who go about teaching evolution as a fact of life are great con men. The story they are teaching may be the greatest hoax ever. In explaining evolution, we do not have one iota of fact. This fellow said, evolution is a general postulate to which all theories, all hypotheses must henceforth bow in order to be thinkable and true. Evolution is a light which illuminates all facts. This is a Catholic priest. He's the guy who sold the Catholics on evolution. And by the way, 3 different times the Pope has accepted evolution and says, well, it must be true, so we've got to make our teaching fit with it. My Bible says God's Word is a light. Evolution is not a light to illuminate all facts. But by the time a kid gets going through 12 to 16 years of school studying this stuff out of these books, he's likely to believe in it. 75% of the kids that go from Christian homes to public schools lose their faith after 1 year of college. 75%. Hey, if a kid goes 12 to 16 years in your school, how's his faith going to be? Here we are in the middle of the Bible Belt. Well, I'm convinced the Bible Belt needs to be belted with the Bible a time or two. So why do people believe this theory anyway? Well, some believe it because that's all they've ever been taught. They simply don't know any better. When I spoke in Ukraine, former Soviet Union, I was speaking at a university over there. There were 30 professors that came in the room and heard me speak for 2 hours on creation and evolution. After 1 hour, one of the professors was crying. I asked the interpreter, I said, what's he crying about? And she said, well, he's never heard the creation story. He didn't know there was one. He's so excited, he wants you to keep going. Never heard of creation, a professor at the university. I think we got the same problem in America. We got an awful lot of folks that simply have never heard the other side. All they've ever heard is evolution. Here's a Russian textbook. Guess what? They use the same stories over there that they use over here. Same lies to support evolution. Some people believe in evolution because their job depends upon it. They don't want to give up that job, of course. Some believe it because they hope there's no God to answer to. Some believe it because they have social political reasons. You see, evolution is the foundation for communism, socialism, Marxism, Nazism, the New World Order. We cover that on the next video. Some believe in evolution because they simply have too much pride to admit they are wrong. The Bible says God will give them strong delusion. And if you really honestly, sincerely believe that you came from a rock, you are deluded. This is strong delusion. And you ought to pray for God to have mercy on your soul. You have been deluded. Okay, here we are teaching evolution to our kids. What should we do about it? What are some practical steps? The Bible says, "Ye are the salt of the earth." Now, salt does lots of things. Salt flavors. Salt irritates. If nobody's irritated at you, you're probably not a very good Christian. You don't have to try to irritate anybody. You just try to be salty. That will irritate them. Salt preserves. And if there's corruption, your job is to try to get the corruption out. And if every Christian that loved God got the corruption out of his little world of influence, we could turn this thing around, folks. If there are things in your textbooks that are not true, get them out. You bought the book, your district did. Demand those pages be removed. You don't have to throw the whole book away. Just cut out the bad pages, that's all. Okay, most public school teachers that I know are sincere, dedicated, honest, professional people. My brother's in his 33rd year teaching public school. He led me to the Lord. My mommy retired from teaching public school. She loved the Lord. It's not the teacher's fault, folks. Many teach evolution because that's all they've ever been taught. They simply don't know any better. Many don't know that it's okay to teach creation. It's perfectly fine to teach creation in a public school. There's never been a law against it. So that some people will say, teachers cannot teach creation in public schools. I'm sorry, that is lie number 28. It is perfectly fine to teach creation in a public school. Let me give you the quick history of what's going on here. We've got lots more on this topic on our videotape of our topical series called Teaching a Public School Presentation. We go through all of the laws, all the court cases we can find on this topic, but we'll just give you a quick synopsis here, then we'll quit. In 1800s, up until 1925, creation was taught right from the Bible in the average public school. How many of you, when you were a kid, were taught the Bible in public school? Any of you old-timers out here remember that? When you were taught the Bible in public school and they prayed in the morning before class? Sure. They did that in my school, and I'll be 48 pretty quick here. Then 1925, Tennessee passed a law that said you cannot teach evolution. Now watch this carefully. The law banned evolution from schools. This is where the big court case came in with the Scopes monkey trial. And at the end of the trial, the teacher who taught evolution, or claimed he did, lost and was fined $100. It was still illegal to teach creation after that trial was over. The evolutionists lost the case. But the ACLU put a spin on this and tried to make it look like they won. And for the next 40 years, most schools taught evolution, even though it was against the law to do so. They still included evolution. 1968, the last law banning evolution was overturned. There's never been a law banning creation. There used to be laws banning evolution from schools. Okay? And today, many teachers feel they cannot teach creation in the Bible or the Bible in their classroom. This is simply not true. Subject is dealt with thoroughly on those impact articles you can get from Institute for Creation Research. Some great material there. Louisiana passed a law requiring teachers to teach creation if they taught evolution. It was called balanced treatment. Louisiana said, okay, if you teach evolution, you have to give the same amount of time to creation. Supreme Court struck that down. Said, no, you cannot demand the teachers teach creation. They can teach it if they want, but you cannot force them to teach it. Even Stephen Gould, after the trial was over in 1987, he said, no statute exists in any state to bar instruction in creation science. It could be taught before, and it can be taught now. Evolutionary biologist Michael Zimmerman said, this is after the 1987 court case, he said, the Supreme Court ruling did not in any way outlaw the teaching of creation science in public school classrooms. Quite simply, it ruled that, in the form taken by the Louisiana law, it is unconstitutional to demand equal time for this particular subject. Creation science can still be brought into classrooms if and when science administrators feel it is appropriate. Numerous surveys have shown that teachers and administrators favor just this route. And in fact, creation science is being taught in science courses throughout the country. Eugenia Scott is the president of the National Center for Science Education in Berkeley, California. The purpose of their organization is to keep creation out of schools. That's why they exist. Here's what she said after the 1987 court case. The Supreme Court decision says only that the Louisiana law violates the constitutional separation of church and state. It does not say that no one can teach scientific creationism. And unfortunately, many individual teachers do. Some school districts even require equal time for creation and evolution. See, the state cannot demand equal time. Principals, you can. You can tell your teachers, I want you to teach creation. You principals have the authority to do that. You teachers can just flat do it. You don't need any special permission to teach creation. Just do it. It's like asking permission to breathe. Just breathe, okay? There's no law against it, and there's no law against teaching creation. William Provine, who believes in evolution, says, teachers and school boards in public schools are already free under the Constitution of the USA to teach about supernatural origins if they wish in their science classes. Laws can be passed in most countries of the world requiring discussion of supernatural origins in science classes and still satisfy national legal requirements. And I have a suggestion for evolutionists. Include discussions of supernatural origins in your classes and promote discussion of them in public and other schools. Come off your high horse about having only evolution taught in science classes. The exclusionism you promote is painfully self-serving and smacks of elitism. Why are you afraid of confronting the supernatural creationism believed by the majority of persons in the USA and perhaps worldwide? Good question, William. Why are people afraid of this anyway? Provine said, shouldn't students be encouraged to express their beliefs about origins in a class discussing origins by evolution? They sure should. And teachers, you should encourage your students to discuss and write papers about creation. You can use any of my material you like. Nothing I have is copyrighted. Please have at it. Impact article number 196 tells about how teachers can teach creation in the science classroom. It's perfectly fine. Not only can you teach the Bible in your class, you can teach science and creation. You can teach it straight from the Bible. A public school teacher can get up tomorrow and read Genesis to their students and say, students, let's discuss this. Here's a theory of origins. What do you think? That's perfectly fine. Now, teachers, you are not allowed to try to convert the kid to be a Baptist or Buddhist or Catholic, okay? You're not allowed to do that because you are on the state payroll. You cannot proselytize, but you can educate. And teaching a variety of theories is perfectly fine. 1963, the Bible was taken out of school, some people said. Actually, people just got afraid to teach it, and they had no need to do that. But we were deceived by the ACLU. This court said you cannot use the Bible to try to get kids saved. If you want to teach the Bible, it's perfectly fine. They didn't throw the Bible out. People took it out voluntarily. We got tricked by the ACLU. You can get more on that subject from Elizabeth Ridenour at the National Council of Bible Curriculum in North Carolina. They've helped get the Bible into public schools in 27 states. 150,000 kids now, I believe, have taken the Bible curriculum in public schools. Get a hold of her to see how that's done, okay? You might want to get the book Teaching Creation Science in Public Schools by Dwayne Gish. We can get it through our ministry out there on the back table. See, states can legally require teachers to discuss evolution. They cannot require them to discuss creation. And an awful lot of Christians have wasted an awful lot of time trying to pass laws requiring that creation be taught. You're wasting your time. It's not going to happen. Just tell the teachers you can do it. Teachers can discuss creation if they wish. Mel Gabler of Educational Research Analysts has great material on talking about creation in public schools. Gablers actually research all the textbooks that come out. He said courts allow states to require discussing scientific weaknesses within evolution theory. Texas has a law that requires the weaknesses of evolution be presented in the textbook. But they don't follow the law, and nobody sues them for it, and they should. See, in 1963, the landmark court case said, the Bible is worthy of study for its literary and historic qualities. Nothing we said here says teaching the Bible is against the First Amendment. Basically, that was the 63 court case. In 1980, Supreme Court said you can use the Bible in your public schools if you want. In 1980, the Eighth Circuit Court said you can use the Bible because it will advance the students' knowledge of and appreciation of our religious heritage. In 1987, Supreme Court said you can teach a variety of scientific theories. It's perfectly fine to teach anything about creation in your public school. So teachers, don't be afraid, just flat do it. And if anybody gives you a hard time for it, let me know. I'll be glad to try to help if I can. California State Board of Education says discussing any scientific fact, hypothesis, or theory related to origins is appropriate for the science curriculum. Ooh, interesting. If you want to keep up on what's happening in education, you might want to get a hold of Fred Here's his email, fredb001@spectra.net, and ask him to put you on the loop. And you will get bunches of emails every day that'll keep you up to date on the latest happening in education. Okay, what can we do? I suggest you get a hold of the biology textbooks or the textbooks that they're selecting in your area and see the ratings on them. People have rated them to see which ones are more evolutionary. In 1991, the textbooks were rated, and it was discovered that Merrill biology only had 2.9% devoted to evolution, whereas HBJ had 15.6%. See, some textbooks have more evolution than others. Now, if you're on the textbook selection committee, I suggest go through the books, pick out the least poisonous. Order that for your kids. Then do two things. Write a letter to the ones you did not pick and tell them why. If HBJ starts getting 5,000 letters from around the country saying, we did not purchase your book this year because you have too much evolution in it, well, guess what they're going to do next year? See, they stay in business because of one thing, money, right? Secondly, write a letter to the one you did pick and tell them, we picked your book because you have the least amount of evolution. However, if somebody beats you next time, we're picking them. Get the evolution out of your books. You might want to get the book Pandas and People. We sell that through our ministry, a great supplemental biology book that talks about intelligent design. Doesn't talk about God or the Bible. You might want to get this book, Icons of Evolution, if you want to get all the documentation on the 15 different icons that he chose that shows that they've been proven wrong. Go to your school board and say, look, this has been proven wrong. Here's the evidence. Take this out of the books. Get the Gablers to help you with your textbook selection. You can get their book from us. It's only $4. What are they teaching our children? By the Gablers. Mr. Gabler wrote me a letter in April 2000. He said, Dr. Hovind, thank you for using What Are They Teaching Our Children? You'll be interested to know that in our 39 years of work, we have never seen publishers so sensitive or schools so receptive to our textbook reviews and ranking. We are pleased to recommend the Harcourt Scott Forsman Elementary Science Series. They are much less dogmatic on evolution than the others we reviewed. They've already reviewed them all, folks. Get their opinion and buy the books that they recommend. And quickly, the publishers will be scared stiff of Mel Gabler because it influences their pocketbook. Hitler said, let me control the textbooks. I'll control the state. We've got a battle, folks. Some practical steps to fix the problem, and we will quit. Get some creation materials in your public libraries. We get a call or letter just about every week from somebody who gets saved watching a creation videotape from my ministry that the kid found in the public library or the public school library. Get the books in there. Get some tapes in there. You could demand they cut out the pages that have false information. That won't cost the school a dime. If you say, hey, teacher, you know, the information on this page is not correct, or go to the school board or whoever, say, I suggest this page be cut out. You're not asking to put the Bible in the schools, are you? You're asking to get the lies out of the books. How can they object to that? How many of you would help cut the pages out free of charge and bring your own scissors? See, it won't cost the school a nickel. Okay? You could glue the pages together like the principal in Georgia did. Or put a warning sticker in the front cover that says, warning, the page information on the following pages is not true. Or get the students my little brainwashed book. Pass those out on campus, see what happens. Have you been brainwashed by your science textbook? Man, that'll stir up some interesting discussions. Most states have laws requiring textbooks to be accurate. Florida has a law that says instructional material shall be accurate. And when you've got a textbook teaching the kids that the human embryo has gill slits, that's not accurate. That's 125 years out of date. Get that out of the book. Okay? Texas, almost every state that I've found the laws on this topic have laws requiring textbooks to be accurate. Wisconsin does, Alabama does. It says textbooks should be adequate and current. To show the horse evolution is not current. It's 50 years out of date. Alabama has a textbook, a sticker in the front that's supposed to have a sticker. And by the way, if you're in Alabama watching this tape and your textbooks don't have stickers in the front warning the kids about micro and macro evolution, you need to demand they put those in there. That's what the law says. Those stickers have to be in there. We can get you a copy of one of the stickers if you call my office. California Code says California textbook shall be accurate and reflect current and confirmed research. If a California textbook tells the kids the human embryo has gill slits and you got a tailbone you don't need anymore and the whale used to walk around on those little bones, that's not current. Get that stuff out of there, okay? And again, all the documentation can be found in this book right here, Icons of Evolution. It'll give all the stuff you need to prove it's not correct. Okay, students ought to be told you have the right to be exempt. Now, if your kid is going to a public school, and by the way, you might want to consider that whole topic, get them out, homeschool or private school if you can. But if they're going to a public school and they're being taught evolution and you don't want them taught evolution, it's very simple. We've got a book called Students' Legal Rights. You look on page 53 and it tells you what to do. You go to the school and you say, in writing, I do not want my student, fill in the name, Herman, Johnny, Sam, whatever, I do not want my student taught evolution. Sign your name. Have a witness sign it. Hand it to the principal. Do you understand? I don't want my student taught. If you don't want them taught sex ed, sign a statement saying I don't want them taught this. Period. Now the school is required to give alternative material to your students. Suppose 97% of the kids were standing in the hallway doing the alternative material. It's not going to take the teacher too long to figure out, we might as well skip this. The kids are all gone out in the hallway. If you don't know your rights, you might as well not have them, folks. Now here's some things to watch for. If a school is going to have something that is good in the school, tomorrow morning I'm speaking in a public school in Illinois. They often will have it be an opt-in program. In other words, you have to get permission signed in order to come to the good program. If they're going to have a bad program, then they make sure it is an opt-out program. Now, how many of you ever were given a note to take home to get signed and you forgot or lost the note? Yeah, just about everybody. See, they know. You need to demand a level playing field. All the programs are going to be opt-in or opt-out, but none of this mixing them up. Social engineering, which they're trying to do here. Now, don't confront your teachers publicly. Kids, if they're teaching evolution, don't confront them publicly if you can avoid it. Now, if you are late to class frequently, if you're a troublemaker or a goof-off, if you never do your homework, if you don't pay attention in class, then please don't tell them you're a Christian. Shut your mouth, okay? If a test question comes up and it says, what evidence do we have for the horse evolution? You can say, the textbook says, blah, 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 write down what you're supposed to have learned, and then you can close out by saying, however, this is not correct. Learn the material, but don't swallow it. Don't believe it, okay? You can ask to be exempt. If they're teaching you something that parents that you don't want your kids to learn, demand that they be exempt. It's your child. It's not the school's child. That's your child, okay? You can give videos to your teachers to watch. Thousands of teachers get converted to creationism by watching or reading creationist materials. The teacher is not the enemy, okay? Most of them are really good people. They just have been trained wrong, that's all. You should pray for them. Teaching public school is hard work. Pray for those folks. Get a list of them and pray for them. Invite them to a creation seminar. Have them call me with any questions. Ask your teacher to show a creation video in class. You don't need to ask permission, just do it. Teachers, you need to learn what some of your kids learned years ago. It's easier to get forgiveness than permission. Think about that one for a while. Okay? Some of you ought to run for school board. The school board decides which books you buy, You could get on the curriculum committee. You could pass or enforce the laws requiring books to be accurate. Some people are afraid of what people are going to do. The Bible says the fear of man bringeth a snare. I think we need to be converting the teachers and students. Jesus didn't spend much time changing the Roman Empire. He changed individuals. That's where the battle needs to be fought. You could write letters to the editor about creation and evolution. That's what started my whole ministry. I moved to Pensacola, started writing letters to the editor, and here I am 12 years later, speaking 700 times a year on the topic of creation and evolution. Donate some creation books to your school library. Bert Wagner can help you get them in. He knows the steps to take in order to get the books in the library. Educate others. Use creation as a means of evangelism. Folks, after 30 years of studying this, I'm convinced Satan is using our own school system to destroy the next generation of kids that comes through. What are these kids being taught anyway? Boy, nice looking book. That's sharp. Feels, Feels heavy. Quality printing. Gorgeous pictures. And poison on just about every page. Man, we got a battle, folks. Some of you are more worried about who wins that dumb ball game than what your kids are being taught, aren't you? You ought to get right with God. There's a battle going on, folks. I'd encourage you to get busy and do something for God with your life. Let's all stand, bow our heads, and close our eyes, and let's pray and be dismissed.